On an adventure in the footsteps of Scott.
In November 1911, Captain Robert Falcon Scott set out to conquer the South Pole for England. He reached the pole after a 78-day trek across the icy wastes, only to find that the Norwegian, Amundsen, had arrived 34 days earlier. Devastated, he began the 883-mile return journey to his ship, but he and his 4 brave companions died in the attempt. Three-quarters of a century later, at the exact spot where Scott's expedition started, another ship, the Southern Quest, is preparing to leave for the Antarctic. She's being refitted to make her ice-worthy, and on board will be the team who are to spend an Antarctic winter in a tiny hut before crossing the ice-covered continent on an 883-mile one-way walk to the pole. This is the brainchild of one man, expedition leader Robert Swan, who's devoted the last 6 years of his life to realizing his dream to follow in the footsteps of Scott.
And there it is. I mean, that is reality. The dream is no longer when you can touch the ship and see the warehouse full of equipment. That is reality.
Like Scott, Robert Swan is an enthusiastic amateur. And for this dangerous enterprise, he needed the help of one of Britain's most experienced mountaineers, Roger Meare.
We were 2 days out of Southampton, bound for the Antarctic with the British Antarctic Survey, sitting on deck watching the sun go down. And Robert broached the subject of repeating Scott's route to the South Pole. And I think at that time, the initial reaction was of being totally underwhelmed by the whole idea. I was not at all interested in repeating what Scott did in the way that he did it. I think my interest gelled when it occurred to me that it may be possible to apply modern mountaineering ethics to a big polar journey.
This meant Roger and Robert walking to the pole alone and unaided. But they still needed tons of provisions and equipment for the year they'd be spending in the Antarctic. Finally, on November the 8th, the Southern Quest set sail for New Zealand, just as Captain Scott had done so many years before. Their stay in New Zealand was brief, and Robert and Roger were given a big send-off, together with the 3 others who would winter with them. Mike Stroud, the doctor, John Tolson, the cameraman, and Base Commander Canadian Gareth Wood. southward passage can only be made during a few brief weeks after midsummer, towards the end of January. For the rest of the year, pack ice grows menacingly. Antarctica is the windiest, highest, and coldest continent, and it's larger than the USA and Central America put together. Uncertain of the conditions that lay ahead, the ship headed for Cape Evans, where Captain Scott's hut still stands.
And care and attention to the equipment are, you can run into a problem even in the temperatures we'll be at.
Like there'll always be somebody on the bridge, no matter what the situation of the ship is, whether at ice or at anchor or at sea. And they will be responsible for knowing where people are. Well, regardless of the sort of the means we're using to get stuff ashore, the first thing...
Although preparations for landing were meticulous, they would be nothing compared to those required for the polar walk. As they neared the Antarctic, temperatures fell and it became light night and day. Just before midnight, 10 days from New Zealand, they spotted their goal, Antarctica.
When one has a dream for as long as I've had one, when you actually see it, well, you can't really believe it. You expect everything to sort of take on a neon light appearance and stars to flash in the sky and goodness knows whatever, but it was a very quiet and peaceful moment.
Feeling apprehensive but excited, the 5 winterers made for Captain Scott's hut.
There was a great feeling of anticipation, but yet a great feeling of reverence. It almost as though we were going up to a holy shrine in some sort of respect. A feeling of quietness. To speak beyond a whisper would have been wrong somehow.
Robert, Roger, Gareth, John, and Mike had arrived. Like Scott, they would spend the winter here before Robert and Roger set off to walk to the pole. Scott had taken 7 days to unload and build his hut. He was able to anchor by the sea ice and use his dogs and men to carry his equipment ashore. But the expedition had to ferry their equipment in on a pontoon. And only muscle power moved the 64 tons of cargo. It was a frenzied time as the ship had to leave quickly before the sea ice froze around her. Everyone worked a grueling 15-hour day, stopping only for food and sleep. It took 5 days to unload the ship, and work began building their winter base, just 200 yards from Captain Scott's hut.
My role as I saw it in the expedition, was to be primarily responsible for putting together a base for 5 people in the Antarctic for up to 2 years. Putting together the base included everything from knives and forks right up to the aviation fuel, to the type of stove, to the type of heating, water supply, furniture, everything. And I saw this as quite a challenge. Our hut was prefabricated in London, and all the pieces numbered, and they go together in a specific order. All of us agreeing on the site, I was determined to erect it as soon as possible. Mike noticed that a lot of the windows, as the hut was planned, were then facing away from the McMurdo Sound and the water and the views of the Western Mountains. At that point, views and things just didn't concern me at all, and I didn't care. We had a window open that side, that was fine. Well, he wouldn't have it. His attitude was we either move the windows or we move the hut.
I'm telling you, I don't care. I haven't got an argument against you, so I think that we should turn it around, because you've got the only argument for turning it around. So I think we should do it.
Yeah, but in the wrong place now. We might have to put the floor up. Get the vent, the stove.
Well, the vent is done. We can't change that, whatever happens. Now, whether you have 1 window there or 2 windows, the vent doesn't make any difference at all. We now have to box it in because we can't build a shelter on that side.
Eventually, a solution was found, and the hut was assembled. And as the first phase of the expedition neared its end, there was time for Roger to contemplate the future.
The idea that we would eventually be setting out to walk to the pole, unconsciously, I think, coloured everything.
The ship departing, to me, was a moment of deep sorrow, but deep joy as well. It was a moment I'll never forget, that's for certain.
The Southern Quest headed back to Australia on January the 5th. For the 5 left behind, the months of isolation had begun.
These are the remnants of the food taken to the South Pole, and the feeling looking at these stores is really how awful it must have been for Scott to have run short of them, knowing the amounts of stores that must have been here, the amounts of stores that lay only 11